The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the faint, metallic tang of blood that Qin couldn't quite shake from her senses. Grandpa Lu's room was suffocating, not from the lack of oxygen, but from the oppressive weight of expectation clinging to every hushed word. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting a deceptive picture of warmth across the crisp white sheets of the hospital bed. The old man, frail and paper-thin, clutched Lu Jinxiu's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. His eyes, however, held a weariness that spoke of a journey nearing its end. Qin Zhou stood a little apart, a silent shadow in the periphery, her presence acknowledged but not truly embraced. She observed the scene with a detached curiosity, as if watching a play unfold on a distant stage. "Jinxiu," Grandpa Lu rasped, his voice thin and reedy, "promise me a grandchild." Each word was a labored breath, punctuated by the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tank in the corner. Lu Jinxiu's expression remained impassive, a carefully constructed mask of filial piety. He squeezed his grandfather's hand. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll take care of it." The words were smooth, reassuring, yet Qin saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes, a subtle tightening of his jaw. He wasn't promising out of love, she knew. It was duty, obligation, the preservation of image. Qin Zhou's stomach churned. A grandchild. The old man's dying wish was a shackle binding her to a man she barely knew, to a life she desperately wanted to escape. She had married Lu Jinxiu for financial security, a desperate escape from her own family's suffocating poverty. But the gilded cage had proven just as confining. Lu Jinxiu was a ghost in their opulent apartment, a phantom husband who offered only indifference and the occasional condescending glance. His touch was cold, his words calculated, his presence a constant reminder of the bargain she had struck. The air in the room grew thicker, the silence stretched, punctuated only by the wheezing breaths of the dying man. Qin Zhou felt a sudden, desperate urge to break free, to shatter the suffocating tableau of familial duty. An idea, audacious and reckless, bloomed in her mind. She took a step forward, her voice calm, almost detached, cutting through the strained quiet. "Can you make me pregnant?" The words hung in the air, stark and unexpected. Lu Jinxiu's head snapped towards her, his eyes narrowed, a mixture of surprise and suspicion swirling within their depths. Grandpa Lu's breathing hitched, a flicker of confusion replacing the weariness in his gaze. Qin Zhou met Lu Jinxiu's stare, her expression unreadable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Fear warred with a strange sense of exhilaration. This was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice. But what did she have to lose? Lu Jinxiu's lips curled into a thin, sardonic smile. "Are you suggesting artificial insemination?" His tone dripped with disdain, as if the very idea was beneath him. "No," Qin Zhou said, her voice unwavering. "I'm suggesting a transaction." She held his gaze, her own eyes hardening with resolve. "I'll give you the heir your grandfather wants." And in return, Lu Jinxiu raised an eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. Qin Zhou swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. 100,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Lu Jinxiu's eyes, usually cold and distant, now burned with a calculating intensity. He studied her, dissecting her with a gaze that made her skin crawl. Qin Zhou fought the urge to flinch, to break away from his scrutiny. She had laid her cards on the table. Now, she could only wait. Grandpa Lu's weak voice broke the tension. "Jinxiu." He looked from his grandson to Qin Zhou, his eyes clouded with confusion. Lu Jinxiu's gaze shifted back to his grandfather, his expression softening into a mask of concern. "Don't worry, Grandpa," he said soothingly. "We'll discuss it." He turned his back on Qin Zhou, effectively dismissing her from the conversation. His words, however, were directed at her, low and laced with warning. "Wait outside." Chin-Jio felt a surge of anger, hot and prickly, rising in her chest. He treated her like a servant, a pawn in his game. But she swallowed her resentment, reminding herself of the prize. 100,000. Enough to start over, to build a life free from his suffocating control. She turned and walked out of the room, the sterile smell of the hospital clinging to her like a shroud. The corridor was quiet, the muted hum of medical equipment a constant background drone. She leaned against the cool wall, closing her eyes, trying to quell the turmoil within her. She had made a proposition, a bold, reckless gamble. Would he accept? And if he did, what would it cost her? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the closed door of Grandpa Lu's room. Waiting. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her frayed nerves. The hospital sounds, once a muted hum, now seemed to amplify, pressing in on her, suffocating her. She could almost hear the hushed conversation taking place behind the closed door, the whispers that held her fate in their grasp. Finally, the door opened, and Lu Jinxiu emerged. His expression was unreadable, his eyes like chips of ice. He didn't speak, simply gestured for her to follow. Qin-Jiu's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation churning within her. She followed him down the sterile corridor, her footsteps echoing the hollow beat of her own uncertain future. The dim, smoky bar pulsed with a low, throbbing beat, each vibration a hammer against Qin-Jiu's tightly wound nerves. The ice in her whiskey clinked softly against the glass, a brittle counterpoint to the chaos brewing inside her. Lu Jinxiu's words, sharp and cold as shards of glass, echoed in her ears. 1 month, Qin-Jiu. 1 month, or you'll regret it. A month to conceive. A month to chain herself even further to a man who saw her as nothing more than a vessel for his family's legacy. She swirled the amber liquid, the ice clicking a mournful rhythm against the crystal. Regret? Wasn't she drowning in it already? He'd left her there, stranded amidst the opulent indifference of the bar, to stew in his ultimatum. To scheme, to plot, to find a way to escape the suffocating cage he'd built around her. The irony was bitter, she was trapped in a gilded cage, a bird with clipped wings, surrounded by a life most would envy. But envy couldn't warm the chill that seeped into her bones, a constant reminder of her powerlessness. A shadow fell across her table. Another drink, madam. The waiter's voice was soft, a gentle ripple in the turbulent waters of her thoughts. She looked up. He was young, his features pleasant, his eyes holding a hint of something knowing. An improbable thought flickered through her mind. Perhaps he understood. Perhaps he saw the desperation clinging to her like a second skin. No, thank you, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the music. He lingered for a moment, a silent question in his gaze. Then, with a subtle incline of his head, he gestured towards a quieter corner of the bar. An unspoken invitation. Hesitation warred with a sudden reckless impulse. What did she have to lose? The corner booth was shrouded in shadows, offering a semblance of privacy. He slid in opposite her, the waiter facade melting away with a surprising ease. His eyes, no longer veiled by professional courtesy, held a flicker of amusement, a spark of intrigue. The first time was so wild, he began, his voice low and laced with a hint of something that made her pulse quicken. It was a statement, not a question, and it hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Qin-Jiu's breath caught in her throat. How? But even as the question formed, a strange calm settled over her. This stranger, this enigmatic waiter, saw through her. He understood the desperation thrumming beneath her carefully constructed composure. And in that understanding, she found a flicker of perverse comfort. She met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "It needs to be again," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of her desperation. She laid bare her predicament, the cold, calculated bargain Lu Jinxiu had presented her with. The waiter, whose name she now knew was Bo Xian, listened intently, his expression unreadable. "A child," he mused, swirling the ice in his own glass. His gaze met hers, sharp and piercing. "If the child looks like him, it would be very cute." The words were light, almost teasing, yet beneath the surface, Qin Jiu sensed a current of something darker, something that resonated with the growing desperation within her. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of whispered conversations, shared secrets, and a desperate, fleeting intimacy. In Bo Xian's arms, Qin Jiu found a temporary escape, a brief respite from the suffocating reality of her marriage. He was attentive, gentle, a stark contrast to the cold indifference of her husband. A sharp ring sliced through the hazy intimacy, shattering the fragile illusion of escape. It was the hospital. Grandpa Lu's condition had taken a turn for the worse. Panic clawed at Qin Jiu's throat. The clock was ticking. Lu Jinxiu's ultimatum echoed in her ears, a relentless drumbeat against her sanity. She had to go. She had to play the role of the dutiful wife, the concerned granddaughter-in-law. The mask slipped back into place, the fragile vulnerability she'd allowed herself to show with Bo Xian vanishing behind a carefully constructed facade of composure. As she scrambled for her purse, a strange calm settled over her, replacing the panic with a chilling resolve. She glanced back at Bo Xian, a fleeting image of his enigmatic smile imprinted on her memory. A seed of something dangerous, something exhilarating, had been planted. The game, she realized, had just begun. And she, for the first time, felt like a player, not a pawn. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension that filled Grandpa Lu's hospital room. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting a deceptive picture of serenity onto the crisp white sheets of the bed where the frail old man lay. Qin Jiu's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her gaze flitted between the oxygen mask obscuring her grandfather-in-law's face and her husband, Lu Jinxiu, whose impassive expression was more unnerving than any outburst. Each tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow against her resolve. 1 month, he'd said. 1 month to conceive a child. The words echoed in her mind, cold and sharp as shards of ice. It was a demand, not a request. A transaction, not a desire. And she, as always, was the pawn in his game. "Explain yourself, Qin Jiu." Lu Jinxiu's voice, smooth as polished jade, cut through the silence. His eyes, dark and unreadable, bored into her. She could almost feel their weight, pressing down on her, suffocating her. Qin Jiu swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "He's waiting for a performance," a cynical voice whispered in her mind. "Give him one. Grandfather's condition, it's deteriorating." She kept her voice low, carefully modulated, betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. Her fingers twisted together nervously beneath the folds of her skirt. "Just get through this. Tell him what he wants to hear." Lu Jinxiu's jaw tightened, the muscle ticking beneath his skin. "And," he prompted, his tone laced with impatience. He didn't care for her platitudes, he wanted answers, solutions. He wanted control. "You've been trying," she stammered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Trying to escape his suffocating grip. Trying to find a way out of this gilded cage he called a marriage. Trying to reclaim her own life, her own body, her own future. But none of that was what he wanted to hear. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "Trying? Is that all you have to say?" Her breath hitched. The proximity, the intensity of his gaze, made her skin crawl. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne, a subtly expensive fragrance that now seemed cloying, suffocating. "It's not that simple," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. A humorless laugh escaped his lips. "Not simple. Producing an heir for the Liu family is not simple, Qinzhou. What exactly is so complicated about fulfilling your wifely duties?" Each word was a barb, meticulously aimed to wound. Wifely duties. The phrase felt like a brand, searing itself onto her skin. He made it sound so clinical, so transactional. As if their marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement, and she, nothing more than a breeding mare. Her stomach churned. She had to get out of this room, away from his suffocating presence. "Jinxiu," she began, trying to find the right words, the words that would appease him, placate him, without sacrificing the last vestiges of her dignity. But the words wouldn't come. Her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions: fear, resentment, desperation. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the weight of his expectations crushing her. "I understand your concern, Jinxiu," she finally managed, forcing a semblance of calm into her voice. Her mind raced, grasping for a lifeline, a way out of this suffocating conversation. Then, a sudden, reckless thought sparked in her mind. A gamble. A desperate attempt to seize control. "But I've taken matters into my own hands." Lu Jinxiu raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He took a step back, his arms crossed over his chest. "What do you mean?" Qinzhou took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable fallout. There was no turning back now. Tuvi already found the father of the child. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside Grandpa Lu's bed. Lu Jinxiu's face was unreadable, a mask of carefully controlled emotions. She couldn't tell if he was shocked, angry, or simply calculating his next move. His gaze narrowed. "Explain yourself, Qinzhou. Clearly, you have something to say. Don't test my patience." Qinzhou's heart pounded against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. She knew the risks, the consequences of her words. But she also knew that she couldn't go back. Couldn't continue to be a puppet in his elaborate game. This was her only chance, her only hope of reclaiming her own life. She met his gaze, her own expression resolute. "The child won't be yours, Jinxiu. I've made other arrangements." The lie tasted like freedom on her tongue. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Lu Jinxiu's eyes, dark and stormy, searched hers, trying to decipher the truth behind her words. She held his gaze, her own expression carefully blank, betraying none of the fear that gnawed at her insides. The sterile scent of the hospital room seemed to amplify the suffocating silence, a silence pregnant with unspoken accusations and unanswered questions. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor became a relentless drumbeat, marking time in a game she hadn't realized she was playing. A game with stakes far higher than she could have imagined. The antiseptic smell of the clinic pricked at Qinzhou's nostrils, a sterile scent that mirrored the hollowness in her chest. She sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table, the crispness a stark contrast to the dampness gathering on her palms. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a practiced smile, held a small white stick in her gloved hand. "The results are in, Mrs. Liu." Qinzhou's breath hitched, a shallow gasp caught in her throat. Her gaze darted to the window, where the city sprawled beneath a hazy sky, a concrete jungle reflecting her own emotional landscape. Freedom felt impossibly distant, trapped behind the gilded cage of her marriage. "Doctor, am I pregnant?" The words felt heavy, leaden, each syllable a testament to the charade she was forced to play. Lu Jinxiu's ultimatum echoed in her mind, his cold voice demanding an heir, a pawn in his relentless pursuit of familial approval and corporate power. A child. A life tethered to a man who saw her as nothing more than a vessel for his ambitions. No, the doctor's gentle voice pierced through Qin-Zhou's spiraling thoughts, a single word that shattered the precarious illusion of control she clung to. No. Not pregnant. Not a failure, not yet, but the word hung in the air, a silent condemnation of her inability to fulfill her husband's demands. A strange calm washed over her, a numbness that settled in her bones. Disappointment? Relief? She couldn't decipher the complex cocktail of emotions swirling within her. Perhaps it was simply resignation. Another month of Lu Jinxiu's icy disapproval, another month trapped in this suffocating marriage, another month further away from the independent life she craved. The doctor, oblivious to the internal turmoil raging within her patient, continued, her voice laced with professional reassurance. "You are in good health, Mrs. Lu. There's no reason for concern. Sometimes it takes time. Perhaps trying different positions might increase your chances of conception." The clinical words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the transactional nature of her marriage, reducing intimacy to a calculated act, a means to an end. Qin-Zhou managed a weak smile, a strained curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, doctor." The words felt hollow, devoid of genuine gratitude. She rose from the table, the crinkling paper a mocking soundtrack to her silent despair. The weight of Lu Jinxiu's expectations pressed down on her, a suffocating burden she couldn't escape. Leaving the sterile confines of the clinic, Qin-Zhou stepped back into the bustling city, the noise and chaos assaulting her senses. She felt adrift, a small boat tossed on a turbulent sea. Lu Jinxiu's deadline loomed over her, a dark cloud threatening to consume her. A month. 30 days to produce an heir or face the consequences. Consequences she couldn't even begin to fathom, but knew instinctively would be devastating. Her thoughts drifted to Bo Xian, the attentive waiter from the hotel restaurant. His kindness, his genuine concern, had been a fleeting respite from the coldness of her reality. He had offered her a glimmer of hope, a sense of connection she hadn't felt in years. He had listened, truly listened, to her veiled anxieties, offering a comforting presence without demanding anything in return. She found herself drawn to the familiar warmth of the hotel lobby, the plush carpets and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the starkness of the clinic. The air hummed with low conversations and the clinking of silverware, a symphony of normalcy that felt strangely foreign to her. She spotted Bo Xian, his figure a beacon of calm amidst the bustling crowd. He was attending to a table, his movements graceful and efficient, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Seeing him, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a desperate ember in the face of her despair. He noticed her approach and excused himself from the table, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. "Mrs. Lu," he greeted her, his voice a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. "Is everything all right?" His concern felt genuine, a stark contrast to the calculated affections of her husband. Qin-Zhou hesitated, her throat constricting around the unspoken words. How could she confide in a stranger, a waiter, about the intimate details of her failing marriage? Yet, in his presence, she felt a strange sense of safety, a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "No," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper, the word heavy with unspoken burdens. "Everything is not all right." Her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to sustain the intensity of his gaze. The ornate patterns of the carpet blurred through her unshed tears. Bo Xian remained silent, his presence a comforting weight beside her. He didn't press her, didn't demand explanations, simply offered her the solace of his silent understanding. It was a kindness she hadn't experienced in so long, a simple gesture that resonated deep within her soul. She took a shaky breath, the words tumbling out in a torrent of suppressed emotions. The doctor, the test, it was negative. The confession hung in the air, a fragile testament to her desperation. Bo Sion's expression softened, his eyes filled with a compassion that made her heart ache. He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers, a silent offer of comfort. She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a connection forged in shared vulnerability. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he would help her, that he was the only one who could. And in that realization, a dangerous seed of hope began to bloom within her, a fragile flower pushing through the cracks of her despair. The antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to Chinjio like a shroud. She sat stiffly on the starched white sheets, the crispness a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within her. Lu Jinxiu paced the small private room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, controlled murmur. Chinjio watched him, a familiar hollowness settling in her chest. His concern wasn't for her, she knew. It was for the Lu family legacy, for the grandchild that his ailing grandfather desperately craved. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a clinical pronouncement of her supposed infertility. A convenient lie, orchestrated by Lu Jinxiu, she suspected. A tool to further isolate her, to tighten his control. Lu Jinxiu disconnected the call, his gaze sharp as he turned to her. Grandpa's condition is worsening. The doctor says, he paused, his lips thinning into a cruel line, that he won't last much longer. Chinjio clenched her hands beneath the thin blanket, the sterile fabric offering no comfort. He acts as though I'm the one killing the old man, she thought bitterly. As if my barren womb is a personal affront to him. Aloud, she said nothing, her silence a shield against his inevitable accusations. You know what he wants, Lu Jinxiu continued, his voice laced with a chilling indifference. A grandchild. An heir. He wasn't looking at her, not really. His eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the window, as if the entire conversation were a tedious chore. Chinjio felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. He spoke of heirs and legacies, reducing her to a vessel, a breeding mare for the Lu family. He never wanted a child with me, the realization struck her with renewed force. He wants an heir, a pawn in his games of power. The ride back to the Lu family home was suffocating. Chinjio stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of meaningless color. The opulent interior of the car, the smooth purr of the engine, none of it could soothe the gnawing anxiety within her. Lu Jinxiu remained silent, his aloofness more cutting than any shouted accusation. At the house, the air was thick with expectation. Second uncle, Lu Jinxiu's perpetually anxious relative, greeted them at the door, his face etched with worry. Any news? He asked, his eyes darting between them. Lu Jinxiu offered a curt nod. The doctor is optimistic, he lied smoothly. Chinjio felt a flicker of disgust. Optimistic about what? About how quickly they can turn me into a baby-making machine. The family dinner was a strained affair. Grandpa Lu, frail and weak, held court from his wheelchair, his gaze fixed on Chinjio with a mixture of hope and reproach. She forced a smile, the muscles in her face aching with the effort. The conversation revolved around the impending birth, the hypothetical child already assigned a role in the family narrative. Chinjio felt like a ghost, a spectator in her own life. Later that night, curled up on the edge of the vast, empty bed, Chinjio's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. Mrs. Lu, a smooth, cultured voice inquired. It was the man from the hotel, the waiter who had offered her a solution. Her mind flashed back to his proposition, the indecent proposal cloaked in polite concern. A wave of shame washed over her, quickly followed by a surge of defiance. I told you, she began, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, I'm not interested. The man chuckled, a low, melodious sound that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. I understand your hesitation, Mrs. Lu. But my offer still stands. I assure you, discretion is paramount. Qin Jiu closed her eyes, picturing Lu Jinxiu's cold, indifferent face. The weight of her gilded cage pressed down on her, suffocating her. No, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. It's not right. Lu Jinxiu's voice, sharp and edged with suspicion, sliced through the quiet. Who are you talking to? He stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowed, his expression accusatory. Qin Jiu quickly ended the call, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a wrong number, she stammered, her cheeks flushing with guilt. Lu Jinxiu stalked towards her, his movements predatory. You seem to be receiving a lot of wrong numbers lately, he sneered, his words dripping with sarcasm. He reached out, his fingers digging into her arm, his grip bruising. You will only be happy if you piss Grandpa off to death, right? His voice was low and dangerous. Qin Jiu flinched, her breath catching in her throat. I'm Noti didn't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lu Jinxiu released her arm with a contemptuous shove. I'll give you a month, he stated coldly, his eyes glinting with a cruel amusement. 1 month to get pregnant. If you fail, he let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of doctor's appointments, family dinners, and Lu Jinxiu's increasingly pointed remarks. Qin Jiu felt like a trapped animal, desperately seeking a way out. She thought of the waiter, the stranger who offered her a lifeline, however morally ambiguous. He's not up to par with Lu Jinxiu, she told herself repeatedly. He's just a waiter. It was a comforting lie, a way to justify her growing desperation. One evening, while attempting to navigate the complexities of the Lu family's social circle, Qin Jiu found herself face to face with the waiter again. He was no longer in uniform, dressed instead in impeccably tailored attire that spoke of wealth and power. He greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes holding a knowing glint. Mrs. Lu, he said, his voice a low murmur that cut through the surrounding chatter. Fancy meeting you here. Qin Jiu stared at him, her mind reeling. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't a waiter. He was Prince Bo, a name whispered with respect and awe in the highest echelons of society. Prince Bo, she thought, her mind struggling to comprehend the implications. He offered me the memory of his proposition, once tinged with shame, now shimmered with a different light. Weeks later, 2 lines appeared on the pregnancy test. Qin Jiu stared at them, her hand trembling. She was pregnant. But not with Lu Jinxiu's child. A complex tapestry of emotions unraveled within her, relief, fear, a strange sense of triumph. She thought of Prince Bo, of his quiet strength, his unwavering gaze. You are the most generous person I have ever met, she had told him, the words laced with a gratitude that transcended the transactional nature of their arrangement. He had smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that had reached his eyes. I merely offered a solution, Mrs. Lu, he had replied, his voice laced with a gentle understanding. A solution you desperately needed. Now, cradling the positive pregnancy test, Qin Jiu knew that her life had irrevocably changed. She had escaped Lu Jinxiu's trap, but she had also entered a new game, one with even higher stakes and far-reaching consequences. The future stretched before her, a vast, unknown landscape. And for the first time in a long time, Qin Jiu felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember burning in the darkness. The antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to Qin Jiu like a shroud. It was a smell she'd grown accustomed to this past month, each visit etching another line of weariness onto her face. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, slicing the sterile room into bands of light and shadow. She sat stiffly on the examination table, the crisp paper crinkling beneath her. Her fingers traced the embossed floral pattern, a stark contrast to the knot tightening in her stomach. Dr. Li, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, entered the room, her smile faltering slightly as she met Qin gaze. "The test results are out," she began, her voice soft. Qin held her breath, a sliver of hope, illogical and fragile, fluttering within her. Hope she immediately squashed, reminding herself of the futility of it all. This was a charade, a performance for an audience of one Lu Jinxiu. "No," Dr. Li finished, her voice laced with a professional sympathy that grated on Qin nerves. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Qin carefully constructed facade didn't crumble. On the outside, she remained composed, a slight nod acknowledging the doctor's words. Inwardly, a cold, hard knot of resentment bloomed. A month. A whole month of this elaborate dance, of feigned hope and forced intimacy, all for nothing. Lu Jinxiu's relentless pressure, his grandfather's expectant gaze, the weight of their family's legacy, it all pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had complied, played her part, endured. Yet, her body, her very being, refused to cooperate. A bitter taste rose in her throat. She had given him her time, her pretense of affection, her physical submission. But she would not, could not, give him this. Not a child. Not a piece of her future. "I understand," Qin replied, her voice even and controlled. The doctor's concerned frown deepened. Qin knew what she was thinking. Another victim of a demanding family, another woman trapped in the gilded cage of a loveless marriage. The irony was, Dr. Li wasn't wrong. Trapped. That single word reverberated in Qin mind. But not trapped by Lu Jinxiu, not anymore. This charade, this failure to conceive, was her escape route. A new resolve solidified within her. This wasn't a setback, it was an opportunity. "Dr. Li," Qin began, a subtle shift in her tone, a glint of steel in her eyes the doctor couldn't possibly decipher. "I've been thinking. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, stark and unwavering. The doctor's eyes widened, surprise quickly replaced by a flicker of understanding. Perhaps she had seen this coming after all. Leaving the hospital, the city's cacophony assaulted Qin senses. The incessant honking of cars, the rumble of buses, the chattering crowds, it was a world away from the sterile quiet of the doctor's office. Yet, for the first time in a long time, Qin felt a sense of lightness. The heavy cloak of obligation, the suffocating pressure to perform, seemed to have lifted. She hailed a taxi, sinking into the worn leather seats. As the city blurred past, a plan began to form in her mind, intricate and daring. She would use this, Lu Jinxiu's desperation for an heir, to her advantage. She would play the role of the dutiful wife just a little longer, extract what she needed, and then disappear. The taxi pulled up to a luxurious hotel, its gleaming facade a stark contrast to the gritty streets surrounding it. This wasn't where she lived. Her home was a cold, opulent prison disguised as a marital residence. This was where Bo Xian worked, the unassuming waiter who, over the past month, had become her confidant, her unexpected ally in this twisted game. He possessed a quiet strength, an attentiveness that felt genuine, unlike the calculated charm of Lu Jinxiu. He listened, truly listened, to her anxieties and frustrations. He offered no judgments, no platitudes, only a silent understanding that resonated deep within her. He was a breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere of her life. Qin smoothed down her dress, a simple, elegant shift that belied the turmoil within. She entered the hotel, the cool air conditioning a welcome reprieve from the city's heat. She spotted him immediately, his tall frame and impeccable posture making him stand out even amongst the other staff. He was attending to a table, his movements graceful and efficient. He caught her eye, a subtle smile gracing his lips. He excused himself, approaching her with an air of quiet respect. "Mrs. Lu," he greeted, his voice a low murmur. Everything all right? Not exactly, Qin Jiu replied, her voice strained. She led him to a secluded corner of the lobby, away from prying eyes and ears. The plush velvet seating offered little comfort. The test was negative. Again. She watched his face, searching for a reaction. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a mixture of concern and understanding. It was the same understanding she had seen in Dr. Li's eyes, but in Bo Xian's, it felt different, less clinical, more personal. I'm leaving Lu Jinxiu, she declared, the words echoing in the quiet corner. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply listened, his gaze steady and unwavering. Qin Jiu detailed her plan, the words tumbling out in a rush of nervous energy. She would feign a miscarriage, using the opportunity to extract a significant sum of money from Lu Jinxiu as compensation for her pain and suffering. It was a risky gambit, but she was desperate. She needed to secure her future, to build a life free from the suffocating grip of her husband. Bo Xian listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, a silence descended, heavy and expectant. Qin Jiu held her breath, bracing herself for his judgment. Instead, he asked a single question, what will you do after? The question caught her off guard. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Escape had been her sole focus, the driving force behind her every action. But after? The question hung in the air, unanswered. She looked at Bo Xian, his gaze unwavering, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. And in that moment, a seed of a new plan began to take root, a plan that was even more audacious, more daring, than the one she had just outlined. A plan that, she realized with a sudden jolt, might just involve the quiet, observant waiter standing before her. The future remained a blur, a vast expanse of uncertainty. But for the first time, Qin Jiu didn't feel afraid. She felt a flicker of anticipation, a spark of something that resembled hope. The ice in Lu Jinxiu's glass clicked softly against the crystal, a brittle sound that mirrored the fragility of his patience. The low hum of conversation in the exclusive bar barely registered. His gaze was fixed on the phone, the report glowing on the screen a stark white against the dim ambient lighting. Qin Jiu's movements were meticulously documented, a pharmacy, a fertility clinic, then a hotel. His jaw tightened. A hotel. He hadn't expected such blatant defiance. Or was it desperation? He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the scent of aged whiskey doing little to soothe the simmering irritation. He'd given her a month, a generous time frame, in his opinion. His grandfather's health was declining rapidly, his last wish a great-grandchild, a legacy to carry on the Lu name. And Qin Jiu, his wife in name only, was the key. He'd made the terms clear, a child, in exchange for her financial security, a clean break, a life free from the gilded cage of their sham marriage. Yet, here she was, seemingly playing her own games. A flicker of something akin to amusement danced in his eyes. He'd give her credit, she was resourceful. But was she resourceful enough to outmaneuver him? He doubted it. Qin Jiu pressed her hand against the cool glass of the hotel window, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. The room was sterile, impersonal, a stark contrast to the opulent Lu manor. Yet, here, in this anonymity, she felt a sliver of freedom. The small white pill box in her hand felt heavy, each capsule a symbol of her desperation, her calculated rebellion. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of her biological clock ticking relentlessly against the backdrop of Lu Jinxiu's ultimatum. A month. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. Her throat constricted, a familiar wave of helplessness washing over her. She closed her eyes, picturing her parents, their faces etched with worry, their future hanging precariously on her ability to secure her position within the Lu family. This charade, this calculated pregnancy, was the only way to protect them, to finally break free from the suffocating grip of her circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using the very thing Lu Jinxiu wanted, an heir, as her weapon of liberation. The phone vibrated against Lu Jinxiu's palm. It was Shen Yue, her voice a silken purr, laced with feigned concern. "Jinxiu, darling, are you still at the office? It's late." He could picture her, draped across his office sofa, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the leather. "I'm occupied," he replied, his voice clipped. "Did you really check into a hotel with that woman last night?" Shen Yue's voice sharpened, the pretense of concern dissolving into thinly veiled jealousy. Lu Jinxiu's lips curled into a cynical smile. He hadn't been with Qinjiu. He'd been with a different woman, a fleeting distraction, a way to momentarily forget the suffocating weight of his grandfather's expectations. "Business, Yue. Nothing more." He disconnected the call, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. He knew Shen Yue wouldn't believe him. But her jealousy, her possessiveness, was a useful tool. It kept her invested, kept her compliant. Qinjiu swallowed the last of the pills, the dry taste lingering in her mouth. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Bo Xian's number. He'd been surprisingly helpful, a calming presence in the storm of her anxiety. He'd listened patiently to her carefully worded plea, understanding the unspoken desperation behind her request. He had agreed to help her, his motives a mystery she hadn't dared to explore. She dialed his number, the ringing tone echoing the unsteady beat of her heart. "I didn't get enough sleep," Qinjiu murmured into the phone, her voice laced with a carefully crafted exhaustion. It was their code, a veiled reference to the arrangement they'd made. There was a pause, a silence filled with unspoken understanding. Then, Bo Xian's voice, low and reassuring, "Rest well. Everything is taken care of." A wave of relief washed over her, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She disconnected the call, a strange mix of gratitude and unease swirling within her. She barely knew this man, yet she was entrusting him with her future, her freedom. Lu Jinxiu watched Shen Yue storm out of his office, her high heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. He poured himself another drink, the alcohol burning a path down his throat. He'd underestimated Qinjiu's desperation. He'd also underestimated her ability to intrigue him. He replayed the investigator's report in his mind, the image of her entering the hotel lingering. He found himself strangely drawn to her quiet defiance, her calculated moves. It was a game, he realized, a dangerous game they were both playing. Qinjiu stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her face pale and drawn. She'd done it. She'd taken the necessary steps, orchestrated the necessary lies. She was officially playing the role of the dutiful wife, fulfilling her part of the bargain. But at what cost? The emptiness in her eyes reflected the hollowness in her heart. Lu Jinxiu's phone buzzed again. It was his second uncle, his voice hushed, urgent. "Jinxiu, the old man is asking for Qinjiu." A flicker of surprise crossed Lu Jinxiu's face. His grandfather had barely acknowledged Qinjiu's existence before. He drained his glass, a sudden urgency gripping him. He needed to see Qinjiu, to understand the game she was playing. Qinjiu answered the door to find Lu Jinxiu standing there, his face an impassive mask. "Didn't you say you slept with another man?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Qinjiu met his gaze, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I did what was necessary," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. A strange look flickered across Lu Jinxiu's face, a mixture of anger and admiration. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. The touch sent a shiver down her spine. "Clever girl," he murmured, his voice laced with a newfound respect, tinged with something darker, something possessive. The game, she realized, had just begun. And she was pregnant, not with his child, but with the child of the waiter, the enigmatic Bo Sion, who, unknown to both her and Lu Jinxiu, was Prince Bo, a man whose power dwarfed even the formidable Lu family. The crystal chandeliers cast a kaleidoscopic rain of light across the polished marble floor. The air, thick with the perfume of ambition and expensive fabric, hummed with the low murmur of conversations. Qinjiu adjusted the simple black dress she'd chosen, a stark contrast to the flamboyant gowns swirling around her. It felt like a disguise, a shield against the scrutiny she knew she'd attract. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of her clutch, a nervous habit she couldn't seem to break. Tonight, she was playing a role, one that demanded a cool detachment she didn't quite feel. She scanned the room, searching for the familiar silhouette of Xin Yue, Lu Jinxiu's lover. A flash of crimson caught her eye. Xin Yue, draped in a scarlet gown that screamed for attention, held court near the champagne fountain. Her laughter, high and brittle, echoed through the room. "Isn't that Xin Yue?" a voice beside Qinjiu whispered, tinged with awe. Qinjiu felt a flicker of something cold and hard in her chest, a shard of resentment that she quickly tamped down. "Yes," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Her gaze lingered on Xin Yue, analyzing the actress's every move. The way she tilted her head, the way she touched the arm of the man beside her, it all spoke of practiced allure, of a woman who knew how to wield her femininity as a weapon. Qinjiu's stomach twisted. This was Lu Jinxiu's world, a world of glittering facades and carefully constructed illusions. And Xin Yue, with her dazzling smile and calculated charm, was perfectly at home in it. A waiter, his face obscured by the shadows of a strategically placed potted palm, approached Qinjiu. It was Bo Sion, his disguise impeccable. He offered her a glass of champagne, his eyes meeting hers with a reassuring warmth. "Everything going according to plan," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Qinjiu took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles tickling her throat. The plan. It felt dangerous, audacious, a tightrope walk above a chasm of uncertainty. But it was her only option. Lu Jinxiu, with his icy indifference and relentless demands, had left her no other choice. The image of his grandfather's frail face, etched with a desperate longing for an heir, flashed through her mind. A grandchild within a month, he demanded. A month. The absurdity of it still stung. Lu Jinxiu had simply shrugged, his eyes cold and calculating, and said, "Make it happen, Qinjiu." Bo Sion's presence, his quiet strength, offered a sliver of hope in the suffocating reality of her marriage. He was her escape route, a means to an end. With his resources, she could finally secure her financial independence, free herself from the gilded cage Lu Jinxiu had built around her. The guilt gnawed at her, a dull ache in the pit of her stomach. She was using Bo Sion, just as Lu Jinxiu was using her. But survival, she reasoned, often demanded sacrifices. "Yes," she replied to Bo Sion, forcing a smile. "Everything is going according to plan." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Across the room, Xin Yue's laughter sharpened, cutting through the ambient noise. She had spotted Lu Jinxiu entering the room. He moved with an effortless grace, his presence commanding attention even in this crowd of prominent figures. Qinjiu watched as Xin Yue detached herself from her group and glided towards him, her scarlet dress a beacon in the sea of muted tones. A wave of nausea washed over Qinjiu. She knew she should leave, disappear into the anonymity of the crowd before the inevitable confrontation. But something held her rooted to the spot, a morbid fascination with the unfolding drama. Lu Jinxiu greeted Xin Yue with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, his eyes scanning the room, searching for something, or perhaps someone. His gaze landed on Qinjiu. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool indifference that sent a shiver down her spine. He started towards her, Shen Yue trailing behind him like a vibrant shadow. Qin Zhou's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her role, of the carefully constructed facade she had to maintain. Qin Zhou, Lu Jinxiu said, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with an undercurrent of steel. What are you doing here? The question, seemingly innocuous, hung heavy in the air, pregnant with unspoken accusations. Qin Zhou met his gaze, her expression carefully blank. I could ask you the same question, she replied, her voice steady. This is a Bowden Pictures event. Surely you didn't expect me to miss the opportunity to network. It was a lie, of course. She had no interest in networking. Her only purpose here was to solidify her arrangement with Bo Xian. Shen Yue's laughter, sharp and brittle, cut through the tense silence. Darling, she purred, her hand resting possessively on Lu Jinxiu's arm. Don't tell me you didn't inform your wife about the nature of this event. The emphasis on the word wife dripped with venom. Qin Zhou felt a surge of anger, a hot flush rising in her cheeks. Before she could respond, Lu Jinxiu turned to Shen Yue, his expression unreadable. Yue, he said, his voice low and warning. This is between Qin Zhou and me. Shen Yue's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. The air crackled with tension. Qin Zhou took a step forward, her chin lifted. I am Mrs. Lu, she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. The words, simple yet powerful, hung in the air, a challenge to Shen Yue's presumptuous claim on Lu Jinxiu. A muscle twitched in Lu Jinxiu's jaw. He glanced at Qin Zhou, then back at Shen Yue, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. The scene, playing out under the watchful eyes of the city's elite, was a perfect reflection of the tangled web of their relationships. A web of lies, ambition, and desperate desires. And Qin Zhou, caught in its sticky threads, knew that the night was far from over. The charade had just begun. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to Qin Zhou's clothes, a stark reminder of the charade she'd just enacted. Lu Jinxiu, his jaw tight, paced the hospital corridor, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, clipped and impatient, filtered through the thin walls. Something about shareholders, about a deal, about needing to leave. Qin Zhou watched him, a strange detachment settling over her. He hadn't even asked how she felt, if the procedure had been uncomfortable. Not that she would have told him. The charade was for his benefit, for his grandfather's archaic wish for an heir. A pawn in their game, that's all she was. A hollow ache echoed in her chest, a familiar companion. He ended the call with a curt nod to her. Grandpa's asking for you. Go see him. I have to leave. His eyes held no warmth, no concern. Just the usual cold calculation. Of course, Qin Zhou replied, her voice a smooth, practiced monotone. Inside, a bitter laugh threatened to erupt. He was so predictable. So consumed by his own ambitions. She smoothed down her dress, a simple, unassuming thing that did little to hide the tremors running through her. As she walked towards her grandfather-in-law's room, the antiseptic smell gave way to the cloying sweetness of lilies, Grandpa Lu's favorite. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lilies, symbols of purity and rebirth, filling the air of a room occupied by a man clinging to life, and a woman trapped in a life she didn't want. Grandpa Lu's face, etched with wrinkles, softened when he saw her. Jior, he rasped, his voice weak. Jinxiu told me good news. Qin Zhou forced a smile. Yes, Grandpa. A great-grandchild, his eyes fluttered closed, a contented sigh escaping his lips. The Lu lineage will continue. Guilt pricked at Qin Zhou. This fragile old man, clinging to life, his only wish a grandchild he would likely never see. And she, the vessel of his hope, carrying a lie. The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating. Leaving the hospital, Qin found herself drawn to the small, unassuming cafe where she had first met him. The waiter, the one with the gentle eyes and the quiet smile. He had seemed so out of place in the bustling city, an oasis of calm in the storm of her life. He'd refilled her coffee without being asked, listened patiently to her rambling worries, his presence a soothing balm on her frayed nerves. He was there, just as she remembered, wiping down the counter with a practiced hand. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. "You came back," he said, his voice low and melodic. Qin sat down at the counter, the familiar warmth of the worn wood a small comfort. "I needed coffee," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She needed more than coffee. She needed solace, understanding, a moment of respite from the suffocating web of lies she was trapped in. Something stronger, perhaps. He tilted his head, his gaze searching. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He placed a small glass in front of her, the amber liquid swirling within. "On the house." As she sipped the brandy, the warmth spread through her, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She looked at him, really looked at him, and a flicker of recognition sparked within her. Something in his eyes, in the way he held himself, seemed different. Familiar, yet distant. A memory tugged at the edges of her consciousness, elusive and tantalizing. You look familiar," she stammered, her mind racing. Where had she seen him before? The newspapers, the society pages. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Perhaps. I get that a lot." The news report flashed through her mind. The Prince of Shanghai, returning from abroad. The grainy photograph in the newspaper, the same eyes, the same quiet smile. You are the Prince of Shanghai?" The words tumbled out, barely a whisper. He raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "A secret identity. Don't tell anyone." Qin stared at him, speechless. The world tilted on its axis, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The casual elegance, the air of authority he carried so effortlessly, the way he seemed to see right through her, it all made sense now. The baby, her voice was barely audible. The implications of her actions crashed down on her. The child she carried, conceived not by her cold and calculating husband, but by a prince. He reached across the counter, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. "The baby you give birth to will be too beautiful and won't look like you." His voice was soft, yet laced with a hint of steel. A shiver ran down Qin spine. This man, this prince, he knew. He knew about the charade, about Lu Jinxiu's manipulations. "How?" "I have my ways," he said, his eyes glinting with an unknown emotion. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Lu Jinxiu is not a good man, Qin. You deserve better." A wave of dizziness washed over her. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion, flickered within her. Could she escape? Could she finally break free from the gilded cage Lu Jinxiu had built around her? "I'll give you a month," he said, his gaze intense. "A month to decide what you want. A month to decide if you want a life free from him." He stood up, placing a card on the counter. "Call me when you're ready." As he walked away, Qin picked up the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. Prince Bo Xian. A name that whispered of power, of freedom, of a future she had never dared to dream of. The heavy scent of lilies, the sterile sting of antiseptic, the cold, calculating gaze of Lu Jinxiu, they all seemed to fade away, replaced by the warmth of his touch, the promise in his eyes. A month. A lifetime. Everything seemed possible. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing within Chinjo. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting a deceptive picture of tranquility across Grandpa Lu's pale face. He lay there, frail and still, the epicenter of the storm that had ravaged her life for the past month. Her hand instinctively went to her still flat abdomen, a gesture of unconscious protection. Lu Jinxiu stood beside her, a statue of cold indifference, his gaze fixed on his grandfather. The silence in the room crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of their elaborate charade. Chinjo's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Just a little longer, she told herself, just a little longer and it will all be over. A faint cough escaped Grandpa Lu's lips, breaking the strained quiet. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes clouded with age and weariness. A flicker of recognition sparked within them as he focused on Lu Jinxiu. "Jinxiu," he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. "Grandfather," Lu Jinxiu acknowledged, his voice smooth and devoid of warmth. He leaned closer, the picture of filial piety. Chinjo watched him, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. The performance was impeccable, as always. She wondered if he ever felt even a sliver of genuine emotion, or if his entire existence was a carefully constructed facade. Grandpa Lu's gaze shifted to her, his expression softening. "Qin Jia-child," he murmured, reaching out a trembling hand. Chinjo forced a smile, stepping forward to take his hand. It was cold and papery in hers. This is it, she thought, the final act. "Grandfather, you need to rest," Lu Jinxiu said, his voice laced with a subtle warning. He gently pushed Chinjo's hand away from his grandfather's, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. She recoiled inwardly, the familiar feeling of being a pawn in his game washing over her. "No," Grandpa Lu insisted weakly, his grip surprisingly strong. "Two need to know," his eyes darted between them, a question unspoken but clearly hanging in the air. Lu Jinxiu straightened, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, Chinjo spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I am pregnant." The words hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with meaning. Lu Jinxiu's head snapped towards her, his eyes narrowed in surprise. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something akin to disbelief. Chinjo met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. Let him wonder, she thought, let him stew in his own uncertainty. Grandpa Lu's face lit up with a radiant joy that belied his frail condition. "Truly," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Truly." "Yes, grandfather," Chinjo confirmed, her voice gaining strength. A strange sense of calm settled over her. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back now. Lu Jinxiu recovered quickly, his features smoothing back into their usual impassivity. "That's wonderful news, grandfather," he said, his voice regaining its smooth cadence. He placed a hand on Chinjo's shoulder, his grip tight. "We're so happy." The pressure of his hand was almost painful, but Chinjo didn't flinch. She allowed him his moment of triumph, knowing that it was built on a lie. A lie that would ultimately set her free. The doctor arrived then, interrupting the tense tableau. After a brief examination, he confirmed the pregnancy, much to Grandpa Lu's delight. Lu Jinxiu's family, alerted by the news, began to arrive, filling the room with their boisterous congratulations. Chinjo felt detached, observing the scene as if from a distance. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt more alone. Later, after the flurry of excitement had died down and the relatives had departed, Lu Jinxiu confronted her in the deserted hospital corridor. "You are pregnant," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. "I am pregnant," Chinjo echoed, her voice devoid of inflection. She met his gaze, refusing to cower. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Whose child is it?" he demanded, his eyes burning into hers. Qin tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice laced with a newfound confidence. "You have your heir. Isn't that all you wanted?" Lu Jinxiu's face hardened. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the corridor. It was the waiter, the one who had helped her. He walked towards them, his gait confident and purposeful. Lu Jinxiu's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his features. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The waiter stopped before them, his eyes fixed on Qin. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. The simple waiter vanished, replaced by someone different. Someone powerful. Someone familiar. "I am your new man," he said, his voice smooth as silk, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "The Prince of Shanghai Circle. And the father of your wife's child, Bo Xian."